Okay, so what we're going to do for our Q&A is I'm going to start with a couple of questions just to get it started, just to give you time to maybe think if you haven't already come preloaded, and that's fine if you have, but to kind of think about that and allow David and Phyllis to introduce themselves again, and then we'll open the floor, and you can ask anything that you'd like to ask of David, of Phyllis, of David and Phyllis, or of me, or of all three. So those are your combo packs. You can ask any question directed to any of us, and I might add to the question because it may be one of those where like we could talk about some angles, but we'll repeat the questions so that for the recording's sake, number one, we understand your question, but number two, those watching would be able to hear it and know what was asked. So forgive us if there's some talk back. That's probably a good thing anyways. But let's pray, and we'll ask God's blessings. Father, we thank you for this opportunity to introduce and to get to know David and Phyllis and to hear their hearts. And we do pray that we would really hear their hearts. How have you been working in their lives? How have you gifted them to serve your people? I pray that we would learn that no matter what, and that it would lead to praising you. I pray that in the learning of them, we would also be able to see how and if they would be a good team to bring on to the pastoral team. If David is the right man for us in this season to add to our pastoral team. And thank you for allowing us as a church to go through many pastoral transitions over the years. We trust you for shepherding, and we trust you for our under-shepherds. And we seriously want to think and prayerfully consider his fitness for this church family in the season ahead. So we ask for your wisdom, and we ask that this would be a time of glorification of you as well. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. I'm going to sometimes be checking my phone, which if you've ever been in a meeting with me, you know I don't do that. I usually shut my phone off, or it's not present. But I have asked people on Facebook if they have questions to send them into me private message. So I'm just monitoring that and may take those questions. So I'm not bored or distracted in those ways. Just trying to keep people connected and take advantage of those opportunities. So let's go ahead and get started. Dave and Phyllis, would you please reintroduce yourselves, where you're coming from, kind of in a brief way, and then we'll go from there.
You know a person well when you know their nicknames and not just their name, right? So when Phyllis was a counselor at Scioto Hills, they called her
Cherokee woman, because I was the counselor at the Cherokee cabin. It sounds like you stayed in the Cherokee cabin this week. Oh, you have two?
They did too.
All right. That's fun.
Yeah, and at Scioto Hills, I was the counselor at the same time Phyllis was, and I was counselor in the Braves cabin, and so I was known as Brave Dave. And then in our Cedarville days, I had a nickname too on campus. It's a long story how I got it, and I won't bore you with those details, but they called me a man called Dave. That was a Cedarville name. Doug Daveless kind of stuck at Cedarville too, and still have someone in Michigan that calls me that. And then more current nickname, when we were in Lafayette, I was a 50-year-old intern working with a lot of young men, the age of my son, and those guys called me Daddy Dougs. So there you go. You know a person by their nickname, you know them well. But let me say this, you're going to lose friends if you call her Cherokee woman, because she will not be your friend any longer, okay? So those nicknames, Tinsley, don't call us those nicknames, okay?
But I have been working on the Daddy Doug's angle, because obviously as we were getting to know each other and as David's position among those I was considering kept, growing and growing, and I thought, okay, this is somebody that I seriously think needs to be presented to the church. It's obvious we have a Pastor Dave, and we would have another because we'll be a team of three. And so what do we call him? And then when he told me about Daddy Doug's, I'm thinking, okay, Pastor Doug's. There's got to be something we can play off of that. But in all seriousness, I've referred to him as David. That's by preference. David is how we've talked in that way. So.
And that's probably my preference, and it's been that way since I traveled to Israel about 15 years ago. On my name tag, they said, "What do you want us to put on your name tag?" And I didn't want to go by Dave when you're in Israel. I wanted to go by David. And so because of that, since then have always preferred David.
That's good. That's good. I'm going to start more with a theological question, just to get the ground running, and I think it's an obvious and a big one, and that is, what is the mission of the local church, and how do pastors fit into that vision, or into that mission, I should say?
There is a commission given not just to the local church, but to every follower of the Lord Jesus, and that was given to us right before his ascension to heaven, when he called us to go and make disciples. And I believe that the mission of the church is to equip the saints to fulfill the Great Commission. And that's what should happen within the context of the local church. This is the proving ground for someone to fulfill the Great Commission, is to come within the local assembly and to be equipped to do the work of the ministry. In addition to that, do they still say at Scioto Hills, 1 Corinthians 10:31, just before a meal?
Yep.
And so it is. That verse is forever embedded in my memory, and Phyllis's too, from when we spent our years at Scioto Hills. Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God.
Yeah.
What's that, by the way?
They put motions to it now.
Oh, do they really?
No knows.
Yeah.
Lots of learn knows.
Okay. And I believe that that is a significant statement that not just for the individual believer, but for the body of believers within the local church, that we are called to glorify God. And that happens within the local church, not just in the Sunday morning singing, okay? That's significant, isn't it, Ham? Sunday morning singing. That's a great way to glorify God with our words, with our hopefully coming from a heart of worship, okay? But it really is significant that the local church equipped the saints to do that all week long. So that's a real significant purpose behind the local church. The pastor's role is to give some leadership, to shepherd the congregation. That's why he's called a pastor, to shepherd the congregation so they will then live that out, or know how, or learn how to live that out. So the equipping of the saints is a real significant part of the role of a pastor.
Good. Well, I'll open the floor for questions. And I might borrow some questions from the previous session that we thought, those are excellent questions, and I can bring those up. But let's open the floor first.
But the question that Rachel and I had was about youth in the church. We're very involved with the youth. We substitute for Sunday school, and before COVID-19 happened, on Sunday nights we were teaching children how to sing. And we've always, since we've been married for 16 years, we've been working with youth in the church. And we were wondering what your vision for children, not necessarily being ministered to, but themselves ministering. What do you believe their role in the church is?
Okay, so the question is, what do you believe are the children's role in the life of the church? And there was kind of a part of equipping them for that. in that question.
Did you say Andrew?
Yes.
And Rachel Harris? Okay. Good to meet you. Yeah, so, of course, children have parents, and let's just assume that we have, like your family, parents that love the Lord. And the role of the local church is to just come behind those parents in the raising of their children, teaching them the admonition of the Lord to love the Lord. And I believe that the role of the church is to come behind the parents. In some cases, parents, maybe in every case, parents need some equipping, some helping. How does that happen in the life of the child? And so, that's very important that the parents have a good idea of what the child or youth is learning within the educational system of the church. And so they can be a support and encouragement to those parents like that. And then along the way, if a child is struggling, or if there's a situation where a child is even wayward, they've gone the wrong direction, then hopefully the parent has a pastor or someone that is older within the church that can come along and help them, encourage them, give them a little guidance in that too. Scriptures are significant in all of this, aren't they? Yeah. And the scriptures address parenting, a lot of issues in parenting. So even just to bring those to our mind when we're going through those times. Phyllis and I see parenting from a different side right now, having an empty nest with no children in the home. But we did raise 2 children, Lydia and Daniel. And by the way, come back tomorrow night and we'll show you some pictures of our family. Does that help you, Andrew?
I think he's asking about not so much our ministry to them, but what is the children's, if you're a child in this church, not so much the church toward the child, but if you're a child, how does a child participate in the life of the church?
Oh.
How do children participate in the life of the church?
You told us how the church can help
The parents.
how the church can help children. But then what is your vision for how children can help the church?
Oh. I think there's some great opportunities for service for not just the adults, but with the children of the church. Yeah. I've seen that happen over and over. And the truth is children need to be realizing that there is joy in serving Jesus, just like the old hymn says. And that can happen. So the child has all kinds of opportunities to serve along with the parents, whether it's maybe helping. I love it when I see a dad with a young boy beside him while they're taking up the offering or something even like that. So there can be some opportunities like that. And then, of course, there's all kinds of fellowship opportunities, too, within it. And I love when men's ministry, it doesn't always have to include the sons, and women's ministry doesn't always have to include the daughters, but I love it when I see that, too. So they're pulling parents and families together as opposed to the idea of separating them. So, yeah, just include them in every part of the local church.
I guess I'll ask to kind of paint with broad strokes right now. Spiritual giftedness. How has God gifted you? Because one of the things that you were very clear about in the previous meet and greet was, us being able to serve as gifted is key in our life. It's a big issue to us in our life. So how has God gifted you believe, for ministry to the church? And we'll start with you, Dave, and then Phyllis. I would like to know each of you.
Yeah, Yeah, my area of giftedness, Phyllis and I both have grown in this area of administration through the years. When we were in our 20s and we entered the ministry both at Calvary Baptist in Delaware, and then also into camp ministry at Camp Barrakel in Michigan, we discovered we had some giftedness in the area of administration, and both the church and then especially the camp began to give us more administrative responsibilities and helping lead and develop and plan and schedule and do those things like that. So that area of administration for both of us. And then for myself, the preaching and teaching aspect is also growing through the years. The more I've learned from the scriptures, the more I want to share it with the people. And it's been a joy to be able to do that. I've not had a lot of consistent preaching responsibilities like Pastor Adam have, or especially like Pastor Dave, but I look forward to growing in that area so I have more opportunities. When I have taught, when I have preached, it's been received well, and people have shared that they felt as if I had that spiritual gift of teaching. And then thirdly, I will mention the area of service. But I'm talking about me right now. I love to serve, and if there's chairs to move, I'm not one that likes to sit and watch other people do it. I want to get involved in doing it with them. So serving in those areas of the physical labor is also a strength of mine.
As I've kind of taken inventory of the spiritual gifts that seem to come out of my life, giving is one of the ones that I see, and serving is a big one. I'm just like him. That's why we just get in and get our hands dirty and just do it and do what's needed. And then administration would be another one that is a big thing that we have grown in. And then he wants me to add hospitality because we like to have people over to our house a lot too. So I love to feed people. So that's always fun.
Is it possible for a pastor's wife to not have the gift of hospitality? And I tend to think it's really important for a pastor to have a wife who's hospitable, because when you come to my house for a meal, you do not want me cooking for you, okay? But you do want Phyllis to cook for you, and she will want you to enjoy her food. So make sure you don't leave a bean on your plate, because she'll take that as an insult that you didn't like beans. So eat your whole plate of food. But hospitality is important. Phyllis is not only gifted in that area, but she enjoys that, don't you? And one example of that is she works in an office right now in a temporary job, and every Wednesday she takes fresh baked cookies to work with her.
A job security as well. You got men work in my office, so they of course love it. So they keep telling me they're going to miss me when I leave, and I said, no, you're going to miss the brownies. My goodness.
But that's a good example of what we're talking about. And by the way, that would be a real burden for me to have to bake cookies. I wouldn't even know how to do it. But she, on the other hand, I always think, do you enjoy this? Why do you want to do this? And that's the reality of it. It's not just a gift, strength, but it's a joy. And there really is something special about there's joy in serving Jesus. Does that help you?
Well, I'm cooking some of your lunch today, so I don't know.
You or
Yeah.
her?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You're getting a double team.
Well, it's almost time for lunch. Here
So,
we go.
Other questions?
You share a little bit more about, obviously, you shared you've been in camp ministry. When did you know that the Lord wanted you to be a pastor? How did that come about? What were the surrounding situations about it?
Uh-huh.
You were like, God has a place to call you that.
Okay, so the question is, you've been involved in camp ministry for 26 years, a significant amount of time, and then you left that to pursue training and eventually pastoral ministry. When did you know that God had called you to leave that camp ministry and it was disobedience not to pursue the Lord's call in pastoral ministry?
Ham and Lindsay, you're asking a good question. And if I can can I go back a little farther than just pastoral ministry, would you mind? So if you go all the way back to Scioto Hills, during my Cedarville years, I fell in love with three things. First, it was during my Cedarville years that I fell in love with Jesus. Cedarville had, my days spent at Cedarville, I grew to love the Lord Jesus. That's the first thing. The second thing is I at Cedarville grew to love serving Jesus. Service was a joy. I found it thrilling and exciting, and spent my summers at Scioto Hills and other camps, and just loved to serve within the Christian ministry at the Cedarville campus. All kinds of opportunities were presented, and I took advantage of them and loved serving Jesus. And then thirdly, while a student at Cedarville, I fell in love with one more thing. And it really was significant for Phyllis and I to meet while students, and then both to serve at Scioto Hills. And we fell in love with serving Jesus together. And so those are the three things. Always had a real fondness towards camp ministry, and even during my days at Delaware with Pastor Dave, Carolyn, serving there for those 2 years, I still had a longing to be involved in camp ministry. And so the Lord allowed that to happen in 1989. After spending 2 years in Delaware, we're able to go off to Camp Barakel, and loved serving in a camp setting. So much so, we thought maybe we would be there 5 years, but it turned into 26 years, so we're just a temporary little stay. 26 years, and during those 26 years, I'm getting to your question, Ham. During those 26 years, the Lord began to give me an increasing desire to do more of the specific work of pastoral ministry. The Lord was giving me more and more opportunities to fill pulpits when pastors were out of town in our area. Camp would often send me off to a church to do a camp presentation and to preach. And I grew to love those opportunities. And then more and more, not just me, but we began to do more and more mentoring of young adults while we were in the camp ministry. And we wanted to build into their lives not just a season of summer, but we wanted that to go all the way to their graduation, and even to visit them in the hospital when that young couple would then get, when they would have deliver that first child. We wanted to be there when that child was born. We, in addition, wanted to be at the hospital when the grandparents was breathing their last breath, and see that final departure and be there with them to comfort them during that time. So what I'm describing is an increasing desire to do the work of a pastor, which you can do some pastoring in a camp ministry setting, but to do actual pastoring, it needs to happen more consistently. And that, so I said this to Phyllis, maybe 5 years before we left Barakel. I'm feeling a call to the pastorate. And she said,
No. And you have to understand, I had just started working with the girl counselors at camp. I was the women's head counselor. And so I would work with the girl counselors, interviewing them, hiring for the summer, and then mentoring them through the summer, walking with them. And that's a love of mine, is working with girl counselors and young women like that. And I had just gotten that position, and I'm like, no, I just started this. I don't want to do that yet, or I don't want, no. And so he was gracious and backed off, and continued to pray about it. And then
for 1 year. And then we went back to the Smoky Mountains. That's where I first began to talk to her about it. We went back to the Smoky Mountains a year later, and we began to talk about it, and she was a little more open for conversation.
You could see the Lord working in his heart as well as mine.
Yeah.
Of like, no, this is something that the Lord is working on.
Yeah, if I'm called, my wife has to be behind me, okay? And so that was real significant. And then the other thing that was significant, Ham, in this process was, okay, I'm feeling this desire to be a pastor, but is this just my desire? Or do the people around me see me as, okay, yeah, the Lord's kind of grooming you in this direction? Or is this just my opinion? And so we began to talk to other people, and actually David Culver was one of those people, and other mentor-type people that had gotten to know us and could affirm that, no, this is God at work in your heart. And so they gave affirmation, yeah, you are qualified to be a pastor, and she is qualified to be a pastor's wife. And that's what the process looked like. And eventually, we told our Barrakel staff, a group of 25 adults that we worked with, that we were feeling this call. And they even gave us an affirmation. Yeah, we can see you guys doing this. We hate to see you go, but we understand. We love the local church. We sense that this is a true calling of God for your life. And so we left there April 15th of 2016 and knew we needed a season of preparation, and that was Lafayette, where we spent 3 years in preparation. And in the past year, it's just been seeking the actual local congregation to pastor. And so that's what the last year has been.
Good. That's a question?
My name is Jeff Holloway. It's nice to meet you. I think this would be a good follow-up. You're looking at taking on an assistant pastor role. Do you have the current vision about how long you would want to do that? Do you want to try to move into a lead pastor role at some point in time? Yeah, I mean, I know that God could change how things would work, but what's your current thought about, this type of position and how long you would like to stay here? Is it a temporary thing like Barrakel for 5 years?
Okay, so the question is, serving as an associate, what are your, if you, at this point, if you could control the timelines of things, do you see yourself serving as an associate long-term, or do you have a desire to roll into a lead role or a different change down the road? Kind of give us your mindset on where you're at there.
Yeah. Jeff, thank you for your ministry at the keyboard. I've seen you sit up there and play some of these recorded Sundays, and I appreciate that, so thank you. Yeah, I had to ask myself the same question, Jeff, because I believed going into seminary, in my mind, I envisioned more of a lead pastor role, partially just because of my age. And then during seminary, began to wonder, okay, what kind of church am I looking for? What kind of specific pastoral role am I looking for? And didn't even know coming out of seminary. And the Lord has used this last year to show me that I actually believe maybe for the rest of my ministry years, man, my age, that could be just 2 years, but I actually believe that I could be an associate all of those years. And I'm like you, I don't really know what the Lord has for our future. But as I've evaluated my giftedness, I mentioned service earlier. And in the Barrakel setting, I served alongside of the director. I was not the director. Paul Gardner is the director, still is, and was all of those years. And that was a sweet relationship, and I didn't mind serving him. I didn't mind working under his umbrella of responsibility. I didn't mind that. As a matter of fact, I don't think it's too proud to say, but I think I did that well. I submitted to his leadership, and not in a negative, got-to way, but I wanted to, and it was a sweet, sweet thing. So I don't envision this being short-term by any means. We want our roots to go deep. We're not shallow people. They were deep at Camp Barrakel after 26 years. And I realize I'm going broader than your question. But that uprooting process, if you grab a plant and start pulling, if those roots are deep, you're going to have to pull a long time. And ours were deep. And boy, it took a lot of pulling to get us to uproot from Barrakel. And some of the roots actually ripped off. And boy, it was painful. Oh, it hurt so bad. And then you go to replant in Lafayette knowing you're only going to be there 3 years. They never let our roots go that deep. Mm-hmm. Too painful to pull them up. So it was kind of a shallow time at Lafayette. And then we go to Columbus, Indiana, thinking this is a step towards the pastorate. We still haven't let our roots go deep there either. We're eager to let our roots go deep. And I do believe that with the right man leading, I'm fine following as an associate. Yep. And I am okay with Adam being that man. We've got to know each other
Yeah.
well enough
Yeah.
that I'm okay with that. He's gifted in a lot of areas that I'm not, and I appreciate that about him. So.
I think one of the things that, hopefully I've been up front and we're working through the pastoral transition process, that we're looking to put together a team of 3 pastors that are complementary. And so I'm very carefully looking at David over the course of almost a year now, of getting to know them and how he's gifted and wired, and some of the things that stand out that he possesses that I possess in smaller form, and so some of that is we both love people, but he's very personal, whereas I might be more task-oriented, or I love people through trying to help move us in healthy places. He helps move people. It's different in that way, and it's complementary. So my danger is I can get so focused on getting things done that my instincts aren't to say, how are you doing? I rarely ask the question, how are you doing? It's usually, there's where we need to go. And to have somebody who is charged up to go, how are you doing, is such a complementary help on a pastoral team. And that's when, right away, he's like, we're going to go slow through looking for a church because we want to plant the roots deep. So we have to take a good look at the community, a good look at the people. That's fair. That's good. But yeah, that passion was clear up front and has sustained itself all the way through, that desire to plant your roots deep.
Good question, Jeff. Thank you. I hope that helps you answer.
Good. I thought I saw a hand start to go up when I went to call Jeff, but I don't know. One of the things about your pastoral search has been kind of self-limiting in the sense that when you graduated, you didn't just put your name out there to go anywhere in the country. You wanted to restrict it to within an hour or 2 of Columbus, Indiana, for a reason. Would you share that reason and kind of where that's at in terms of you may be moving from there to here, and that's going to affect the people that are your reason? So.
Yeah, we have an empty nest. We don't have children in our home, but we do have a mother that requires some care and some attention. And so during this transition in between seminary and the pastoral ministry, we've been able to live with my mom. Little did we know, the Lord knew this, and the Lord planned this, that we would be with her during the stay-at-home order. And Mom being 80, we were very hesitant about her getting out. So she pretty much stayed at home for 2 months, never went to the store. Sometimes we'd get her out and take a little walk around the block, but that was about it. So that's been real significant. We have, my dad, Mom's a widow. Dad's been gone for a number of years. And so we do have a concern about our parents. And right from the beginning when we left Camp Barakel, I knew that in our search for a pastorate, we believed that we had a responsibility to make sure our parents were cared for. So we wanted to limit that search so we could have pretty fast contact to her parents in the Clinton County, so just east of here, and my mom in Columbus. So we've looked either at southern Indiana, southern Ohio, northern Kentucky. And along the way, we would even get some interest from a church that was a little out of that range. And we said, no, that's not. I do believe it was significant when Jesus was breathing his last from the cross, and one of those statements he had was a concern for his mother Mary, right? And he said to John, he clearly gave John the role to take care of his mother. I believe that's a responsibility we all have, not to just care for our children, but then later on to care for our parents. And so that's a significant one for us. I will give you a little bit of a taste, though. My sister now also lives in Columbus, and the past year she has developed more of an eagerness to be the primary caregiver of my mom. So as we leave Columbus, we leave knowing that my mom will be cared for. And so we don't feel as if we need to be there day in and day out like we've been for the past 12 months. So that's a help to us.
Then our children are also in Columbus. My daughter and her husband are both nurses, and they live there, and my son and his wife live there also. So it's, yeah, not like we're just leaving her. So it's a blessing.
Yeah, Jeff.
I have another question that's a little bit hypothetical, so feel free to put whatever situation in mind that you would want. But oftentimes, church members might have disagreements, maybe significant disagreements with each other, or there might be tension that would build up about, say, a difference in theology. I mean, I could pick some, and if you want to, go ahead. But, or if you want to pick something different, maybe a difference in social opinions, things that are current events. How do you see a pastor's role in dealing with differences in church members, especially, say, theological differences, which I think are more important, but social roles? How does a pastor help navigate those situations? What should they do?
Okay, so how should a pastor navigate the different levels of disagreements that might come up in a church, like a theological disagreement or a social disagreement, meaning people in the church have very strong views about a social issue, but their views are different or opposed? What's the pastor's role in that?
Yeah, and excuse me. It probably, we would need to step back and evaluate, is this a sin issue? Or is this just an area of difference in opinion? And I opened my Bible right away to Matthew 18, because I think this is a good pattern for us when someone is sinning. And so, Jeff, I would evaluate, okay, what is their sin here? And sometimes the sin might not be the issue, it might be how they've responded to the issue. And so then you're dealing with not just the issue, but the response of it between the two individuals. But the Matthew 18 is a good pattern for dealing with sin issues. But Jeff, as I listen, I think you're probably asking the question with more of an opinion issue. Is that true? Yeah. And I think maybe I partially answers what I just said about the response. Encouraging both of them to not sin in their response to one another. To deal with this disagreement, this difference in opinion in a biblical way. And the two of them need to go at it in a submissive, not self-centered way, but a loving way. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. There's a great pattern from James on dealing with disagreements, differences in opinion. Encourage them both to think it through. Now, Jeff, did your question address what is the pastor's role in that? I would want them to hopefully work on it together, the two parties. But sometimes a mediator is needed, and mediation can be the role of not just a pastor, but a spiritual leader that they would respect, can come in and guide them towards hopefully working this through in a not sinful, responsive way. So just to listen, it might take some time, might take more than one conversation, but just trying to get them both to listen to each other and listen before they speak, and then be slow to become angry in this situation. Sometimes there are situations that cannot be reconciled, Got an opinion, not going to change it. Got an opinion, not going to change it. Okay, how can we live with the difference? How can we do that in a not sinful way? So in summary, the pastor might be called to be a mediator between the two.
Here at Shawnee, I feel like we do small groups very well, and we also do
Okay, so the question is, do you have thoughts or ideas about how the whole church together, maybe not so much in smaller ministry form, but the whole church together could minister together to the community?
Yeah, not knowing the church, okay, so I'm going to pretend as if I know the church because I realize that there might be some things about, Andrew, you know about the church, but I don't. You might, if I present my idea, you might say, well, that wouldn't work here because, but the concept of some kind of, if you're looking for an outreach, you mentioned specifically to the community, to offer a community outreach picnic, which would include almost a bit of a celebration for the community, just to become so the body within the church could rub shoulders with the community, invite the community to the grounds for a community picnic. Let's use that phrase for a minute. To have an event like that where all of the church could be involved. The ladies could bake the pies, and the dads could put up a big tent, and the kids could help with the carnival games, and just to throw a big party like that for the whole community. It would be a way of touching, reaching out beyond the walls of the church. And no doubt if there's free food, then maybe a different, that would maybe even draw the people in. So that's just an idea. I thought of that idea because we did something like that at Faith at Lafayette, a community picnic that attracted
2,000 people. Because I ordered 2,000
Well,
hot dogs and we
well,
only had
that's-
10 left.
that's what you were feeding
Yeah.
2,000, but I would say attendance was more doubled because we had, yeah. So that one comes to mind, Andrew, the concept of a community picnic. Yeah. And then I assume Shawnee Hills is already doing a vacation Bible school, not? So something like that was a big outreach too at Lafayette. And interesting, it can involve all the church, because everybody could get involved, much like the community picnic. So there's a couple ideas that come to mind. Mm-hmm.
As long as I can also bake a pie.
Mm-hmm.
You got a question? Yep.
Hello, I'm here to call. Quick question for you. I know you're eager to serve. What do you like to do in your free time or time away from ministry, like de-stress or kind of tune out what's going on? I guess a little bit of your day-to-day ministry at the church.
Did you say Paul?
Andrew.
Andrew.
We'll
I
allow
got
Andrew
Paul
to-
out of that.
Yeah. So, yeah. So the question is, God gives the gift of recreation, which literally means recreation. What do you do that kind of renews you that isn't necessarily involved with your responsibilities? It could be hobbies or otherwise, but what do you do to de-stress or to recreate, to be ready to and charged again?
Mm-hmm. We can answer that what we do together, and then we'll answer that separately. How about that?
That's fine.
Yeah, Phyllis and I together decompress, unwind. We have, I mentioned earlier about the call to the pastoral ministry. It was during that time that Phyllis and I began to walk regularly together. And so maybe for the past 10 years now, we have been walking regularly. And because of the decision-making that was taking place during that time, those walks would nearly always include a stop to pray. We had a prayer bench at Barracal, and now we have a prayer bench in Columbus. We always walk by and we stop there and pray. Every once in a while, someone will be on the bench, and we think all kinds of bad thoughts about them. Don't you know that's our prayer bench? What are you doing on it?
And you pray an imprecatory prayer,
Yeah.
right? From an imprecatory psalm.
Yeah, I'll be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
But that really is true. Sometimes someone will be on that bench and it's
Yeah.
like, oh, wait a second, that's our bench. So, but that's significant. And then Phyllis has shown a lot of interest in my hobby of cycling. And so we've been biking now in Columbus Sometimes when we aren't walking, we're biking, but even that has.
Bicycling, not motorcycling. Because people are like, make sure you make a difference there. Yeah, he's like, oh.
But that has also a prayer stop along the way too, doesn't it? And that's a different bench. And so that's a couple things we do together. And then I probably should mention too that we have a real fun getaway. I might mention this again later, but in the Smoky Mountains. So more of a, not a regular getaway to answer Andrew's question, but more of a seasonal, when we love to get away to really decompress and refocus, we love to go to the Smoky Mountains, have a place there we enjoy staying at. Tell them what you like to do individually and
Probably watching movies and reading. And those are kind of things that I enjoy. If I'm decompressing, like if I just want to be like, I sit down and watch a movie or read a book. So yeah, that would be kind of my thing. Because, we bike and hike and walk. So that's kind of in there. So yeah, those would be my two go-tos.
And yesterday morning, I jumped on my bike without Phyllis, and I rode to a neighboring town about 10 miles away and then rode back. And during that time, that was what you're talking about. I spent the way there to the neighboring town praying, mostly about today. And then on the way back, I listened to a podcast on my way back, a good sermon from John Piper. So that was fun. So that's a little bit of my decompression is cycling like that.
Yeah, when we ride bikes, we have a Phyllis ride, and then we have a David ride. So, yeah, when I'm going along, it's like, guys, let's enjoy this ride. But when he goes, it's so he has to leave me at sometimes and just go do his own thing.
A question from the previous session that I thought was really good, and it's for both of you. Concerning discipling people, discipleship ministry to people, what are some key components to discipleship ministry to people? The discipleship relationship, I think is how it was asked.
It's significant when we make a plan to disciple someone that we have some kind of connection there. Because oftentimes, if you put two people together and they don't seem to connect, it's just not going to work. You can give all the other good, right components to it, but if there's not a connection, it's just not going to work well. So that's part of it is connection, and therefore I think it's good to commit to a discipleship relationship short term, and then if that works out short term, then you can expand it to a longer term relationship. So that significance of connection. Then secondly, when the second part of that component is the right tool, something to give you a platform to work on when you're mentoring or discipling, some kind of resource. And I'll tell what I've used with young men, and Phyllis can tell you what she's used with some young ladies. But one resource for young men I've found helpful and I've worked through many times with young men is a book by Kent Hughes called Disciplines of a Godly Man. And I've got a copy of that, and I always write the date on it when I went through and who I went through, and it's just covered with ink and bookmarks, and it's been a real good tool in mentoring and discipling with young men. What have you used with young ladies?
I have used various studies, but one that comes to my mind would be Trusting God by Jerry Bridges. Is a really good one to use. And kind of going back to his, when there's not a connection, sometimes, you try to, we've had those relationships where at camp we would get assigned a person called a one-on-one. So you would meet with them weekly and spend obviously one-on-one time with them. And few times it just didn't connect. And so what I hope in a church setting, is if that would happen, then what a wonderful thing to have Michelle or Carolyn as resources to say, okay, so it's not working out between, I think Susan was her name, I used her as an example. I said, Susan, and it's not clicking here. So who could I connect her with? So, what a blessing to have, you guys have been here forever. And so that, just having that resource to be able to reconnect, and that would be something I would love to have a part in of creating a mentoring system of like, if you want a mentor, let me know, and then talking with you and then connecting you with an older woman or a woman that you can, meet with, again, for a short time, but just to help you in an area. And I just think it'd be fun, but just making sure that connection's good and, gonna click.
So besides the connection and beside the resource, then the third one that I think is really important is good follow-up. I don't like relationships where you just meet once a week, don't hear from each other, don't see each other the rest of the week, I don't like that. I want to have some context, some follow-up with my person, and would hope that maybe that would include just some recreation time together, spending time together, or even helping each other with a house project, whatever it might be. But at least have some email, some text back and forth just to pray for each other. Phyllis and her discipling has really had a prayer significant. She's always got people texting her saying, would you pray about? And she does. It's not just, I'll pray for you, but I know she does. And so I think this follow-up is also a significant component in that discipleship relationship.
And sometimes when we use the word counseling, we think often of coming into a room, having an appointment with someone that you meet with, and that is a part of counseling for sure. But like church discipline, counseling has lower intensity levels of counseling. We counsel one another. We can one another in our talking of truth. And everywhere between that to one-on-one with a counselor. Well, one area in there, mentoring is a form of counseling, and sometimes mentoring begins because of a concern over an issue or a needing help and maturity in an issue. And one of the things is you guys have completed your certifications in ACBC counseling, and you're pursuing a master's degree in biblical counseling. One of the goals that we have, if the Lord would call you here, is to begin building grounds for that type of relationship among people in the church, equipping people for one another in mentoring ways and in counseling ways, and even like changing our church library to a resource center where we're thinking through those items, those issues, and saying, okay, disciplines of a godly man, that's a good recommendation. We should resource the church with some of those. So a dad, I bought one for Tinsley and myself, disciplines of a young godly man. And so we're going to go through that. And having those resources available and then connected to people is part of the vision of bringing them on and allowing biblical counseling to be not just a formal ministry, but a church of counselors to one another who are biblical in the counsel they give to one another. So we have time for probably a couple more questions. I don't know if that feels like, it's been too long, or already? It's already. That's how I feel.
We have a lot of college-age students who come in during the school year, and then, of course, a lot of them go away. Do you have any thoughts about ways to provide resources to them? Like, what sort of ministries would we do to try to help them? If you have thoughts about that. And then separately, what are ways that we could, for lack of a better term, use them as resources or have them also engage in ministries that we have? So what are things we can provide them, and how are ways that we can maybe utilize them?
Yes, so we do have a lot of college students that are in our area. We're very close to college, and so that is a part of our ministry life. And so maybe I'll add to the question in your answer. Well, in your answer, maybe you can share that you've served in a church that was in a big college town, and so the college dynamic is a part of your experience. But what would you think is helpful for a church that is ministering to college students, and how do you see the college students themselves being a part of the life of the church? Is that a fair recreation of the question? Okay.
Our background with young adults includes not just Camp Barakel, which I've already mentioned, where we would have, it was our responsibility, Phyllis and I, and we had other staff that helped. We would care for the 75 young adults that would join us for the summer season. There were about 75 that would be there for 10, 12 weeks. Yeah. So that's background. Then he mentioned specifically Lafayette. Faith Church is in Lafayette and have one of their campuses just on the outskirts of Purdue's campus. So just full of young adults there too. So that's our background. We have a significant background with young adults and ministering to them. Trying to think of his question now.
Well, we kind of like with Andrew's first question, not only how does a church minister to college
yeah.
students, but
Incorporate them.
how do you see college students being a part of the life of a church?
Yeah. I've sensed that they are kind of a part of Shawnee Hills, right? Don't some of them get involved in even helping with the Awana program? Yeah. Yeah, actually, a friend of mine said, "You're going to Shawnee Hills this weekend?" He said, when our daughter was a student at Cedarville, she helped with the Awana here on Wednesday nights. And Shuttlebauer is the last name, Janelle Shuttlebauer. So she helped with, does that name anything to you guys? She helped with Awana here maybe 10 years ago while she was a student. But that's, you guys are already doing some good things, getting them involved in serving, which is significant. Yep. And then open up the opportunity for the mentoring, like we've just talked about. And I think you already have some women system for getting women kind of, so opportunities like that you're doing as well, right? And then, of course, just attending the services. But probably the question I have for you is how do those students at Cedarville even know that you're here in Jamestown, you know? Do they know that? And how can that become more known? So, and do they have transportation here? You know, these are some questions that I have. Yeah. When I was a student, you know, just we'd often walk down to Grace just because it was so convenient. Yeah. And so maybe to incorporate them, just somehow getting them to know that you're here and making sure they have an opportunity to get here too. So, Jeff, does that help you? I guess I guess I'm kind of excited about what you're already doing.
Well, I mean, there is a good amount of things, so
Yeah.
you're already listing quite a few things. I just thought you
Yeah.
might have some other ideas also, but that's fine. It was a good answer.
Yeah, I don't, you know,
I thought perhaps some college students might be listening to the live stream, and I thought they would want to hear some things like that.
yeah, right. Well, and we would love to have, and I know some of you are doing this as well, we'd love to have some of them in our home, you know.
Yeah, at Barracal, I mean, that, we always had some college, we called them part-time staff or, you know, seasonal staff. And they were always coming over to eat
Yeah.
and, you know, whatever. So, yeah, we have a passion, we have a love for college-age students. And
If you have free cookies,
yeah, they come.
Yeah,
And they eat, they're fun.
yeah. And Andrew,
Follow up to Jeff.
yeah.
You know, I would assume, and I could be totally wrong, but I would assume that the vast majority of young people who are going and serving at a camp are going to be self-starters in a lot of ways. But we also get some, and I think maybe these are some of the ones that Jeff's thinking about, that they come, they sit, they leave. And that's all they do. And how do you get those? I know you had experience with students like this. You have to over the years. How do you get that student who just wants to show up, do the bare minimum, and then go because they kind of know in their heart that they should because they've been raised in a church, but then they're not really making their time here. They're not making their time here their own. This is just kind of like an hour that they give up on Sunday because they should.
Yeah, so you have college students that do quickly want, self-starters, want to participate in the life of a church, but perhaps how do we minister to or motivate, or what recommendations would you have for the student who is just putting in the hour on Sunday and then kind of going?
Yeah, I think they're putting in the hour. Maybe you can say this in case they're listening. I feel like they're putting in the hour because they don't know
Yeah,
how to, like, what they can do.
okay, so they don't know what they,
Lazy.
yeah, okay, so they're putting in the hour, but they don't know where to go from here. And so there's well-meaning in it. That's the kind of, yeah, Okay, so they're putting in the time, but they just don't know what's next.
And
How
how do you
would you
get
recommend that?
how do you get them to motivated to do that with the right motivation, with the right heart, so that they're not just working in Awana. Okay, check that off my to-do list. But you want them to have compassion for the children that they're ministering to. So how do you do that? And maybe that's part of that mentoring program is people have to realize there is joy in serving Jesus. Jesus saw the multitudes and he had compassion on them. So maybe that starts with that mentoring relationship and just encouragement. Okay, we're studying the scriptures together, but if we just put it in, we're going to become spiritually constipated. What can we do to serve and share and have that compassion? So that's your question. And so maybe good education, the importance of it, making it a priority. And does Cedarville have a ministry fair where you're, okay?
It did. I don't know if it is. With this year is kind of like all bets are off, as we all know, but it does have a ministry fair. I think one of the challenges, though, is that's at one point at the very beginning of the year. So what happens if that student arrives in February?
Yeah.
You don't want to have to say, well, wait till next year. That is a challenge.
You guys know Aaron Cook?
Yes.
So I wonder if Aaron's any help to us on this, Aaron, and I know him because he was at Scioto Hills and I was at Camp Barracal, but for he and I to sit down over coffee and just say, hey, we got all, so are there, I'm asking you now, are there those types of relationships with the Cedarville staff? And Andrew doesn't know, and Ham and Lindsay are saying yes.
Yeah.
Are you really? Yeah. So, maybe just to build those relationships so the student knows you're here and knows there's needs, and then maybe an opportunity to somehow get them here, that there might be a transportation problem too, so.
There is.
Yeah. Yeah. And that takes some direction, who lives in the area, who's willing to help them get here for Wednesday night Awana, that type of thing, to coordinate all of that. Go ahead.
And I think, and it kind of goes back to like the hospitality thing of, you see them sitting over there in the corner on a Sunday, and it doesn't have to be a pastor that does this. You can always say, hey, why don't you come to our house today? And I think it's just building into their lives is the start of that, where you invite them to, meet you and your family and then just kind of nurse that along and then invite them maybe to help with Awana or, just part of that church, what you do.
Wherever they're gifted.
Yeah.
And where they can serve in a fruitful manner.
I work with the Cubbies on Wednesday nights. Would you be willing just to come along and help me with that if I stop by and pick you up? You can have dinner at our house, and then we'll, so
Yeah,
personal invitation.
And especially college students, who doesn't like to eat supper in a real person's house, That's what we figured out at camp. I mean,
Yeah.
they'd come in our house and be like, oh, carpet, can I lay on your floor? Sure, go ahead. Trying to minister to them.
That's good.
Jeff, thank you for getting us thinking like this. And we have a heart for it and just not sure what that looks like in your assembly, in your community, and how to make that happen.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we're trying to, even in the midst of the COVID situation, present you and recommend you to the church family, because it's going to take time to know the community, to know the church, to know where those dots can be connected, and yet there's still a lot to do. And so having you on the pastoral team while Pastor Dave is on the pastoral team and I'm on the team allows us to continue to try to help with some of those other things while you get to know those connections. And you have the time to do it, because if it were just the two of us, you're not going to have the time. I can tell you, you're not going to have it. But that's the beauty of the additional pastor, is it allows that acclimation time, the acclimatization to take place and to help us connect those.